Ancient Egypt wasn't just pyramids and mummies. Some of their secrets are honestly unbelievable. From strange beauty trends to technology that seems way ahead of its time, here are 10 things you probably didn't know about ancient Egypt. And trust me, some of these facts sound completely fake, but they're real. Number 1. Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. The most famous face of ancient Egypt, the woman practically synonymous with the land of the Nile, was actually Greek. Cleopatra VII descended from the Ptolemaic dynasty, which was founded by Ptolemy I, a Macedonian Greek general who served under Alexander the Great. When Alexander's empire fractured, Ptolemy grabbed Egypt and started a ruling family that held power for nearly 3 centuries. And throughout that entire time, the Ptolemies largely kept to their Greek customs, spoke Greek, and married within their own bloodline. Cleopatra was the exception in a pretty remarkable way. She reportedly took the time to actually learn the Egyptian language, making her one of the very first in her dynasty to bother doing so. So the queen we picture as the ultimate Egyptian ruler was really an outsider who just happened to connect with her adopted homeland better than any of her ancestors ever did. Number 2. While we're talking about famous rulers, let's talk about Ramses II, because this guy helped pull off something truly groundbreaking. Back in 1259 BC, Ramses and the Hittite king Hattusili III sat down and hammered out one of the earliest recorded peace treaties in human history. Egypt and the Hittites had been going at it for generations, fighting over territory and dominance in the ancient Near East. But eventually, both sides got tired enough to put it in writing and call a truce. The treaty covered everything from mutual non-aggression to the extradition of refugees. And here's the part that really gets me. A copy of that treaty is actually on display at the United Nations headquarters in New York, hanging right there as a symbol of early diplomacy. Over 3,000 years old, and it's still being held up as an example of how rivals can choose peace over war. Not bad for a couple of Bronze Age kings. Number 3. Alright, from ancient diplomacy to ancient entertainment, because it turns out the Egyptians knew how to throw a game night. The board game Senet dates all the way back to around 3500 BC, making it one of the oldest known board games in the world. It used a 30-square board and throw sticks instead of dice. And here's the thing, everyone played it. Pharaohs, priests, farmers, you name it. It crossed every social class. Now, we should be honest here. Nobody is entirely sure what the exact rules were. Scholars have pieced together reconstructions from limited evidence, but there's still plenty of debate. What we do know is that the Egyptians took this game seriously. How seriously? Seriously enough to bury game boards in tombs alongside the dead. King Tutankhamen himself was buried with Senet sets, which tells you this wasn't just a casual pastime. It held real cultural and possibly spiritual significance. Number 4. From game boards to legal rights, because ancient Egyptian women had freedoms that would have been unthinkable in most other ancient civilizations. Women in Egypt could own property, enter into contracts, take people to court, and even initiate divorce. These weren't rare exceptions. These were everyday legal rights baked into how Egyptian society functioned. Compare that to ancient Greece or Rome, where women had far fewer protections, and Egypt starts to look remarkably progressive. Now, female pharaohs were not the norm, let's be clear about that, but the fact that they existed at all says something. Hatshepsut ruled for roughly 2 decades with full royal titles, and she wasn't alone. Sobeknefru and Tausret also held the throne with complete pharaonic status. These weren't women ruling from the shadows. They wore the crowns, they built the monuments, and they wielded the power on at least 3 separate occasions across Egyptian history. Number 5. Speaking of people who weren't afraid to stand up for themselves. Back in the 12th century BC, the tomb workers at Deir el-Medina basically invented the labor dispute. These were the skilled craftsmen responsible for carving and decorating royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, And when their grain rations stopped showing up, they didn't just grumble about it. They organized a full-on sit-in strike, refusing to work until the authorities made good on what they were owed. Now, calling it a union in the modern sense would be a stretch, but the core idea was the same. Workers collectively saying, "Pay us, or we stop." And it worked. This is often cited as one of the earliest recorded labor strikes in history, and honestly, the whole thing sounds like it could have happened last week. It's a powerful reminder that even in ancient Egypt, when the system broke down, regular people pushed back. Number 6. Now, while those workers were fighting for their grain rations, the pharaohs and elites were dealing with a very different problem: too much food. We tend to picture ancient Egyptian rulers as these sleek, chiseled figures you see carved into temple walls, but the reality was probably a lot less flattering. Royal diets were packed with bread, beer, wine, and generous amounts of honey, which sounds like an amazing weekend, but was actually just a Tuesday for the ruling class. All those calories added up, and studies of royal mummies suggest that obesity and even diabetes were genuine problems among Egypt's elite. So while the art departments were busy sculpting pharaohs with perfect physiques, the actual pharaohs may have been struggling to fit into their ceremonial garments. It's a surprisingly relatable twist. Turns out even divine rulers weren't immune to the consequences of a really, really good buffet. Number 7. Okay, so speaking of things that weren't quite what we imagined, let's talk about the pyramids. You've probably heard the story that they were built by massive armies of slaves, right? Yeah, that's almost certainly wrong. Archaeological evidence strongly suggests the pyramids were constructed by paid laborers who received wages, food, and even medical care. The workforce had a permanent core of around 5,000 skilled workers, supplemented by larger rotating crews, possibly up to 20,000 people, drafted through a corvée system, which was basically a labor tax owed to the state. Exact workforce estimates do vary between studies, but the picture is consistent. These were organized, compensated workers, not enslaved masses. And here's what really brings it to life. These crews left graffiti all over the construction sites, including their team names. It's such a beautifully human detail that completely transforms how we think about one of history's greatest achievements. Number 8. From how the pyramids were built to how a pharaoh might have died. And this one is genuinely wild. So, you know King Tutankhamen, the boy king, the most famous mummy in the world. Well, one theory about his death involves a hippopotamus. Yep. When researchers examined his mummy, they noticed something really unusual. His heart and a significant portion of his chest wall were completely missing. That's a big deal because Egyptian embalmers almost always preserved the heart. So what could have caused that kind of catastrophic chest damage? Some researchers have suggested injuries consistent with a hippo attack, possibly during a royal hunt. Hippos were incredibly dangerous. They still are. And hunting them was a known royal pastime. Now, to be very clear, this is one theory among several, and Tut's exact cause of death is still hotly debated. But you have to admit, it's one heck of a way to go. Number 9. From a pharaoh possibly taken out by a hippo to the people who would have tried to save him. By around 450 BC, Egypt didn't just have generic healers. They had specialized doctors. We're talking dedicated dentists, literally called doctors of the tooth, eye specialists, and more. That's medical specialization thousands of years before the modern clinic. Most people picture ancient medicine as one guy with some herbs and a chant, but Egypt had a surprisingly organized healthcare system where practitioners focused on specific parts of the body. It's honestly not that far off from how we do things today. Number 10. And finally, from doctors who specialized in healing to the animals that made ancient Egyptian life a whole lot more interesting. Egyptians were serious pet lovers. We're talking cats, dogs, hawks, you name it. These weren't just yard animals either. Families formed genuine bonds with their pets, And when those beloved companions passed away, many were given the full mummification treatment, just like their human owners. That tells you everything about how deeply animals were woven into Egyptian culture and religion. But it wasn't all cuddles and funeral rites. Some dogs actually served practical roles, including assisting in what we'd recognize as policing duties. So yes, ancient Egypt had working canine units thousands of years before we gave them the name. And honestly, that kind of sums up this entire list. Ancient Egypt was way weirder, way more modern, and way more fascinating than most of us ever learned in school. History really does hit different when you dig a little deeper.